Sent from Disneyland, history in our hand. So much to say about yesterday and the decades we have spanned. Postcards from the park, this journey will embark. See what has changed and what remains on Sent from Disneyland. Sent from Disneyland.
Welcome to the Sent from Disneyland podcast.
Here age relives fond memories of the past.
If it's your first time joining us, welcome. On this podcast, we'll take a journey into the past and explore Disneyland, Disneyland history, and more, with mementos, snapshots, souvenirs, and postcards sent from Disneyland, from 1955 to the present. Let's start by thanking my patrons from patreon.com. You can join in at any level to support the show and receive snail mail from my trips to Disneyland and from my desk, plus some sneak peeks and bonus content. Special thanks to Random Olive, the first patron to this podcast, and to the rest of the e-ticket patrons, to Nia, Eric Daniels, Monica Seitz Vega, Scott Cagle, Russ Romano, Michael and Christina Cross, and Sheila Harry. C-ticket patrons Serious Inquiries Only, Debbie Weinstein, Jennifer Schneep, Angela Reynolds, Grace Coate, Patty Wolin, and Ben and Noel Bruning. B-ticket patron Joshua Bell, and to the A-ticket patrons Elise Sharp, Zealot Infinity, Alexis Robles, Angel DeBlock, and the Beyond the Railroad podcast. I am your host, your post-host Clocky, and today we have 2 postcards sent from Disneyland. The front of our first postcard has the Mark Twain leaving the dock and heading out on the rivers of America. In the background, you can see the top of the Matterhorn. On the back it reads, Mark Twain. The sternwheeler Mark Twain steams quietly out of Frontierland, bound for an exciting journey down the rivers of America. It's postmarked December 31st, 1977, with a Pasadena cancel and a Capitol Dome right of people to peaceably assemble postage stamp, Scott number 1591. I assume they visited the park on Friday, December 30th, 1977, when park hours were from 8 a.m. to midnight. The weather was a high of 67 and a low of 57, with 0.15 inches of precipitation. It's addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Vince Homer of Brackney, Pennsylvania. It reads, 12/31/77. Left Woody Herman last night at Disneyland. Drove up here to Pasadena this morning and parked 150 feet from the Rose Bowl parade route. Expect to be here a couple of days. Had lots of rain in sunny California, but they really need it. Happy New Year, Midge and Dan. I enjoy postcards with fun details like this one has. I looked up some of the information about the Rose Parade in 1978 and found some great trivia. The theme that year was On the Road to Happiness. The Grand Marshal was former President Gerald Ford. There's also a Queen of Roses parade, or a Rose Queen, who was Maria Caron. This position has strict requirements to adhere to. It's also interesting to note that there is a never on a Sunday rule for the Rose Parade, and this affected the 1978 parade, so the parade was pushed to January 2nd, 1978. The last time this happened was 2023. Another related event is the Rose Bowl game team's Welcome Day at Disneyland, a tradition that started when the park opened, so Midge and Dan may have been able to see some of the players and coaching staff from the Michigan Wolverines and the Washington Huskies wandering around Disneyland a few days before the game and parade. Finally, the first thing they mentioned was Woody Herman, who was a headliner and big band clarinetist. He played at Disneyland through the mid-80s. Add some flair to your mail by checking out stamps at Enfield Post. You can explore different stamp options on our Etsy site, grab some great deals by following EP Sunday Sales on Instagram, or create something special and have her design a stamp array for your invitation or celebration. You can head over to EnfieldPost.com and explore all the different vintage postage stamps you can use on your next card or letter. That's ENFIELDPOST on Instagram and EnfieldPost.com for your wedding and vintage postage needs. Enfield Post is the official postage stamp sponsor of the Sent from Disneyland podcast. The front of our next postcard has Sleeping Beauty Castle. You can see guests walking on the drawbridge and Ivy climbing up the front towers. On the back it reads, Gateway to the Land of Fantasy. The drawbridge of Sleeping Beauty Castle beckons guests into the realm of Fantasyland, the happiest kingdom of them all. It's postmarked 1981, with a Santa Ana cancel and a Purple Eagle B U.S. postage stamp, Scott number 1818. Let's assume they visit the park on Sunday, March 15, 1981, when park hours were from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. The weather was a high of 75 and a low of 41. It's addressed to Mr. and Mrs. V. Homer of Brackney, Pennsylvania. It reads, Dear Nita and Vinny, Road Space Mountain, happy to hear from you. Congratulations on a fine article in the paper. You have a beautiful home. If my dad doesn't come up here in September, I'll go see him. Kids treated me to a fun time in Disneyland. Keep well. Love, Florence. As I mentioned in last week's episode, sometimes I have to do a little bit of digging to come up with the date the sender was likely in Disneyland. Luckily, this particular postcard had an interesting stamp. The purple B Eagle stamp was released in March of 1981. Though this stamp does not have a denomination, it was equal to about 15 cents and used for domestic first-class mail. There were 2 postal increases planned for 1981. These stamps were printed and stored starting in 1978. The non-denominated stamps started in 1975 when postal rates were due to rise. This allowed for flexibility in how much the stamp was worth. A letter A stamp was used starting in May of 1978. The practice was done through the letter H and the year 1999. The initial A, B, C, D stamps were color-coded and had the same image of an eagle and a letter. The E, F, G, H stamps received unique images of the earth, a flower, Old Glory, and a hat, respectively. Old Glory representing the U.S. flag, and the hat had an image of the classic Uncle Sam top hat with stars and stripes. This is also similar to how Forever stamps work today. More about the Homers who received this card. I did a search for an article about their house but came up empty. I did read the obituaries for both Vinny and Rita, or Juanita and Vincent, and both mentioned that they had their dream home for over 45 years. I couldn't find the exact address on Google Maps, and the rural area of Pennsylvania that they lived in has no street view to even make an educated guess, but I'm sure it was pretty nice. They also had a lot of family living in California, but these 2 postcards and last episode's postcard were all sent from friends as far as I can tell. My incoming postcard is sponsored by the Art Throwdown. Art Throwdown, or ATD, is a craft hour on Instagram, starting at 9 p.m. Eastern or 6 Pacific. Art Throwdown is a wonderful community of artists who love to share their craft, from creating sticker postcards and coloring techniques to intricate paper cutting and unique crafting. It's always a treat to watch a show and occasionally get some one-of-a-kind postcards from the group. Each host brings something a little different to each show. I'll list some of the regular hosts, or you can follow Russ Romano 2021 on Instagram. The front of my incoming postcard has the entrance to Frontierland. You can see guests with matching hats walking across the drawbridge and the small pond just outside the front gates. On the back it reads, Frontierland Entrance. The saga of the West is relived in Frontierland as guests enter a fort, which is a replica of one which linked the American frontiers together. It's not postmarked, but dated February 11, 2025, and with no cancel or postage stamp. I assume they visit the park on Tuesday, February 11, 2025, when park hours were from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. for Disneyland and 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. for Disney California Adventure. Disneyland closed early for Sweethearts Night. The weather was a high of 70, a low of 48. It reads, 2025-02-11. Bought a lot of vintage cards, and a few had already been sent from Disneyland. Thought you might like them here in DCA before the rush comes later in the week. Don. Thank you so much for the postcard, Don. This was included in the envelope that I used on last week's episode. One thing I forgot to mention was the hand cancel. The rubber stamp red ink hand cancel was used twice on the envelope to void out the stamps as used. This is so much better than the pen cancel when post offices will take a ballpoint pen or a Sharpie to draw through the stamps. Also, thank you for the postcards. I love getting related postcards. It's a great window into either the senders or the receivers. Thanks for listening to Sent from Disneyland. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and tell your friends. It would also help to leave a 5-star rating and comment on whatever podcast platform you use. If you'd like to support the show financially, please check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/sentfromdisneyland. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Sent from Disneyland or my website, sentfromdisneyland.com. For questions and comments, send me a postcard addressed to Sent from Disneyland, P.O. Box 44, Hood, California, 95639. This podcast is not affiliated with Disney, the United States Postal Service, or any post office or Disney-related properties. Opinions expressed on this podcast belong to the host and guests of the Sent from Disneyland podcast. This podcast is produced and edited by Clocky McDowell, website designed by Misty McDowell. Theme song was written and performed by Noah Sunday Lefkowitz. Take it away, Noah.